How did I make it through the storm? How did I make it through the rain? If you want to know just how I got here, it's so easy to explain. It was God's grace.
God's grace.
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 I made it this far.
I made it this far
By the grace of God. God's grace.
God's grace.
God's grace.
God's grace.
It was God's grace.
God's grace.
It's amazing grace.
God's grace.
I made it this far.
I made it this far
By the grace of God. Lord, I thank you for how you brought me. How you brought me through the night. Lord, you kept me and you never left me. You stood by my side. There were so many times when I came so close. Oh man, death, he tried to take me in. So the reason I'm here is not hard for me to see. In fact, it's so easy for me to explain. It was God's grace.
God's grace.
God's grace.
God's grace.
It was God's grace.
God's grace.
It was God's grace.
God's grace.
I made it this far.
I made it this far.
Yes, I did. By the grace of God. I remember the times when I strayed away. Even though I knew the word, still I wouldn't obey. But God's mercy and His grace stayed with me and brought me all the way. God's grace.
God's grace.
God's grace.
God's grace.
God's grace.
God's grace.
It's amazing grace.
God's grace.
I made it this far.
I made it this far
I made it by the grace of God. Anybody wanna know
God's grace.
just how I got here?
God's grace.
Anybody wanna know
God's
how
grace.
I'm still standing?
God's grace.
I made it.
Like cheese.
What's poppin'? Don't mind me just watching. Don't mind me just watching. Don't mind me just watching.
Living, and I thank the Lord that I have my oldest brother sitting next side of me, James Caldwell, the one that raised us. When we was little, we had it hard. And my brother dropped out of school to take care of us. And I give him all the glory and all the credit for it because he loved his sisters and brothers. He taking care of my mama, he taking care of all of them. And else today, he still called and asked, do you need anything? Can I do something for you? But I thank the Lord for him.
like that little remix you threw on that, Greg.
You and your grandson, sing it.
Lord, desire revealed in me. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me.